Good morning, everybody. You should see my screen now. So, presentation is about effective regulation for energy efficient building in Europe, and more in particular, the importance of enforcement, compliance checking, and the control system. So, my name is Xavier Loncour, and I'm working at the Belgian Building Research Institute. So, if looking to the context of the energy efficiency in building, we see that we are putting the bar higher and higher, and we have increasing ambition level. We want to build nearly zero energy building, and in how to build effective regulation to succeed in having more efficient buildings running energy efficiency, and not to fail when we want to reach this objective. When you see the right picture, you could say, okay, at least person trying to read the bar and is not succeeding in that, but we know that in Europe it's possible that some people are trying to cheat and even not to respect the requirements. So the question is not only to have a regulation, but also that to a regulation that is respected in practice. And in this issue, we have specific experience on that in Belgium, because we introduced the first insulation regulation on building in Flanders, a region of Belgium, in 1992-1993. And on this slide, what you see is the average insulation level, where a requirement was set of 200 buildings. Every point is a building according to the construction date. And in 1992-1993, we have introduced a requirement on this and you see the black bar, which is the requirement. Actually, every point, every building inside the area are not complying with the requirement. It was for us a learning that it's not enough that you are putting requirement, but you really need a client framework. So it was the first learning of this presentation, is that without compliance checking, you will have nearly zero impact, and for a lot of people, it was really a big disappointment. Now, the next step in the story is that we have introduced in 2006, again in Flanders, the energy performance regulation with compliance checking this time. And here you see the result of this new regulation. So what you see here is the distribution of the energy performance of the old buildings which have a permit, and you see the results for 4 years, 2006 up to 2009. The regulation was introduced in 2006, and you see some buildings not complying, but the year after, almost every building were complying. And what is interesting is that in 2010, there has been a strengthening of the requirement from A100 to A80, and what we see from the very first year is that almost every building are complying. So it's really a success story in this context, and we will explain what were the success factors for that. But the first element, the first success factor is that with compliance checking, you can expect the full impact of your regulation. It's not sufficient to have that, but it's really necessary. The question is, what are the success factors to succeed in doing effective regulations? And to answer that question, we will use information from the EPBD concerted action, which is an action regrouping every member states in Europe, and there are discussions between the member states to see how to implement the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Has been published recently, which is available on the website you see there. And in this book, you will find one specific chapter on compliance and control. I was responsible for with a colleague from 2012 up to 2015. So most of the examples I will show today are coming from this book. And I will take 3 examples from 3 EPBD requirements. The first one is on energy performance requirement for new buildings. You have requirement regarding the energy performance certificate, the EPC, in the directive, and you also have a requirement regarding the mention of the EPC in advertisement when a building is sold or rent. The second success factor is that you need to know how to have monitoring of your compliance rate. And to illustrate that, I take an example of the requirement of new construction. So in concerted action, we had the discussion, do you know the compliance rate regarding the new building requirement for energy performance? And in 2014, we saw only 52% of the member states did really know their compliance rate. It means that about half of the member states at that moment didn't know what was the compliance rate regarding this requirement. Actually, we know, and it's not from the regulation, but Lord Kelvin to measure is to know. Actually, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it, and it's so valid for regulation. If you do know the compliance rate, you cannot improve your regulation. So it's really something necessary, monitor the compliance rate. The success key is to define a clear legal framework and actor responsibilities. You are looking to the building process. Actually, you have several actors involved in this process. And one of these actors will be the inspector, which is making the control, which is in many countries a civil servant. You will have the owners of the building, you have an architect and several building contractors. Actually, there is a fifth person involved, which is the reporter, which has to report on the energy performance of the building. If you look at the different responsibilities and the legal framework, in general, what we find in Europe is that it's the owner which is responsible for complying with the requirement to fulfill the requirement. And in some states, provisions that give responsibility to developer or professional advisor are existing, for instance, to the architect. Responsibility of the reporter is to make correct certificate of compliance. Just a look to the responsibilities, and if we look at the requirement to have an energy performance certificate inserted in advertisement, we had that discussion in concerted action just to see who is responsible to comply with this requirement. And also in Europe is that in a set of countries, it's the building owner which is responsible. That can be the real estate agent, a representative of the building owner, that can be a web-based company or a notary. But what is interesting to see is that in a set of member states, nobody is responsible to comply with this requirement. In this case, of course, it's impossible to enforce your regulation and to have a high compliance rate. So it's really important to have clear responsibilities. Actually, in Belgium, I told you we have changed the way we are enforcing the regulation, and the enforcement strategy in Flanders is based on 3 pillars. The first one is the carrot, then you have the tam-tam, and then the stick. The stick is referring to the sanctioning system. The sanctioning system is the 5th success key to have an effective regulation. So you really need effective sanction adapted to the local context. Again, looking at the situation in Europe, we see that some member states start the enforcement of the requirement to new building quite recently. You see some of them did start to enforce that in 2014. At that moment, some member states did even not start the enforcement yet. And you are looking the sanction in case of non-compliance for the energy performance of new construction. You can have different kind of sanction. It can be no permit to use the building. You could have an obligation to take some measure. You could have administrative fine or court case. But what we see in state is that no sanctions are given, or effective sanctions are given. And again, in this context, it's impossible to have an enforcement of your regulation. You really need an effective sanctioning system, which is also something which is foreseen in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. So let's take an example with our different actors. The example of a roof, and the civil servant sees the inspector has installed the roof 15 centimeters, whereas 20 centimeters were foreseen in the declaration at the moment of the building permit. So the difference for him, it's very clear, there has to be a sanction. And then you're starting the discussion, okay, the technical specification mentioned 20 centimeters according to the rapporteur, so for him he made no error. The architect, okay, 20 centimeters was foreseen. The contractor could say, okay, I agreed with the owner to only insulate 15 centimeters, and the owner, anyway, okay, we have no ID and we are not competent. So, very difficult situation, and the question is, which type of sanction can you give in this? This is, first, you go for fine, but then the question is, at what level and who should pay? A specific situation in Belgium, and we change our mind on this aspect, is that who should apply the sanction? In Belgium, it's not evident that energy problem would receive a high priority by a judge. So now the sanction, and in this case fines, are directly laid down by the administration, which makes an effective sanctioning system. So in Belgium, we have a fine system. How is it working? If you take just an example, so the amount of the fines are directly defined by the law. For instance, for transmission losses, if you're not fulfilling the requirements, you could have 60 euro per watt per Kelvin. So for instance, if you take a window of 5 square meters, at a difference of 0.5 on the value, 0.5 watt per square meter per Kelvin, the fine would be 150 euro. There one specific element in the Belgian situation is that the fine is directly calculated and presented in the official energy performance software. So if you are not complying with a requirement, you directly know what will be the consequence for you and what will be the fine. And for instance, in Flanders in 2013, fines were given to about 10% of the new Flemish building, mainly regarding non-compliance with the ventilation requirements. Now, let's come back to our example of this roof. So for the civil servant, it's clear the declaration contains errors. So he has to give a fine. Now, how can we decide on reasonable fine without endless discussion? I said in the Belgian example, the level of the fine are directly integrated into the law. So the fine is calculated, the amount you see there, and who should pay that. So again, you could start the discussion, nobody makes an error, and you could try to distribute the fine according to the responsibility, which can be a very difficult duty. So we did choose for a different solution in Flanders, and for instance, we had intensive stakeholder consultation at the beginning of the year 2000, and had the consensus that the inspector should not have to investigate which party are responsible. So in this case, if the declaration is wrong, it's the rapporteur who pays the fine. Of course, maybe the mistake is not coming from here, and he should be able to transfer the fine to the person who made the error. If he has a relevant document, invoice, technical prescription, or visit, he should have a strong case to recover the costs from those who made the fault. Now, in this, it's clear, the amount is clear, and also the fine will be paid by the rapporteur if there is an error in the duration at the end of the work. Now, you can have also a different situation. The declaration in this case is correct, but you see that the building is not meeting the requirement, which is a different situation, of course. In this case, the rapporteur is not responsible for that, and it's the owner that has to pay the amount. Of course, for him, it can be a disappointment. So, it's possible to give sanction to the owner because the private owner are considered as non-competent as builders. So, how is it possible that they have to pay the fine? Actually, in the legislation in Belgium, there is a specific issue that say that the architect must inform the owner if certain decision might lead to non-conformity with the legal requirement. So it's not the fact that he was not aware of the situation. He was aware. He decided to go to continue with the construction process, and at the end he received the sanction. Success factor is about compliant and easily accessible input data. You know that, again, back with our example, there is a sanction given to the router, and you could start the discussion. Okay, there is a fine, but you didn't take the correct input data into account. Okay, and the discussion is starting. So this discussion regarding input data is already discussed the QUALICHeCK project also during other webinars, so I will not enter into more detail on that, but if you are interested, there are a lot of information in the project, QUALICHeCK project, regarding this issue. Okay, if we continue with the 3 pillars for the enforcement strategy in Belgium, we spoke about the stick, that is the tam-tam. You have to show to the different professionals that an enforcement system is in place with sanctioning, and very rapidly everybody will be aware of that. And it's very effective within the professional, e.g., for instance, the real estate agent or building contractors. But you have to be aware that it's working in both directions, and if you don't have any sanctioning system or effective compliance system, they also will know. So you have to pay attention to that. The tam-tam can be efficient and effective, but in both directions. And the third element is about the carrot. An incentive policy has also a role to play by encouraging pioneers, and several member states in Europe have this tradition of incentive policy. It's also, for instance, the case in France. The fifth element regarding effective regulation is choose the appropriate moment to check the compliance. If you're looking to the construction process, you could declare the performance and check the compliance at different moments. You could do it at the moment of the building permit, and it's a situation which is occurring in a lot of member states still now. You could do it at the start of the works, then you have the construction process itself, then you have the end of the work, and then a few months after the end of the works is also a possible moment to check that. We got through an example of this roof. The installer insulated the roof with 15 centimeters, has 20 centimeters was foreseen in the declaration at the moment of the building permit, so there has to be a sanction. Possible discussion could the architect say we have insulated the roof less, but the floor, because it was cheaper, to ventilate the floor, and at the end we have the same performance. If this kind of discussion is starting, actually it's not easy at all to check the composition of a concrete floor when the building is finished. And we see that there are many advantages to base the control on the reporting at the end of the works, because then you have no excuses if information is wrong, as all information was in principle available. So in Belgium we have changed our approach, and now we don't check the compliance anymore at the building permit stage, but we do it a few months after the end of the works, when you are introducing the final declaration. And this situation has other advantages, is that when the building is built, you have the chance to also to take into account real performance of the building regarding, for instance, the air tightness that you measure with a blower door test, or the airflow rates of the ventilation system that you have measured on mechanical ventilation systems. So another advantage to do that at the end of the works. If we look at the situation in Europe regarding this compliance check, what we see is that the standard practice is still to check the compliance a building permit or before the works are starting. You see that almost 80% of member states do the check at the design stage. But actually, second check is necessary as-built phase, and we see an evolution in the member states. You see that before 2010, about 2% of the member states did make this check at the end of the construction work, and we see 4 years after, in 2014, that the number of member states has strongly increased. What can it be as a check? Some member states in Europe, as Sweden, are checking the real consumption of the building. So it's something you only can do when the building is constructed, of course. You could have a permit based on the as-built situation required to use the building, or you could also simply check when the construction is finalized, what we call the as-built situation. So it's also a trend we see in Europe to do that at the as-built stage. The success factor is to design and build an efficient control system. And to illustrate, I take the example of the energy performance certificate that you need in case of construction and for existing building. So this EPC you will have in case of new building. You will also have EPC in case of existing building to sell and to rent. The standard practice now in Europe is that these EPCs are centralized in database. Only database is not a requirement from the Energy Performance of Building Directive, but we see that a lot of member states now do have these database. And this database is, of course, a perfect tool to operate your independent control system. The control system, you may have one for all requirements of the EPBD, so on EPC as in this example, but also on inspection report on new building requirements, for instance. So if we are looking at the independent control system, you see here when these independent control systems were introduced in the different member states, and we see that some member states have really a long experience with that. Some of them had already control system running before 2006. And EPC database in 2012, we saw that 18 of them had a central EPC database, and this element is really seen by many member states as a crucial element of their system, because there you have a lot of information where you can do your controls. The control system, we see most of the member states, it's the control system is operated by a governmental body, for instance, an energy agency. Control can be delegated to a third party, or the control system can be integrated by companies active in the certification field. And combination of these solutions are possible. So the control system, the purpose, if we take the example of the EPC, is that you want to know if your EPC is a good one or a bad one. So you could compare an EPC with a ball, in this a gray ball, and you want to look at that ball, but you don't know if it's a good one or a bad one. If it's a good EPC, it will be a gray ball. If it's a bad EPC, it will be a red ball and will be rejected. So you would like to know with your control system, when you have all your EPC, a lot of gray balls, the ideal situation would be that with your control process, you have the full picture, and you know for every EPC if they are good or wrong. Of course, this is the ideal situation, and it's impossible to run exhaustive control with the control system. So you have to make choices on which EPC will be controlled, and there are several ways to do it. Select the EPC to control at random. You could do it based on complaints, or you could do targeted control, for instance, on suspicious EPCs. When you see the full population of EPC, according to the way you are selecting the EPC to control, you could have a representative picture of the full population, or you could also have another representation of bad EPC. For instance, if you base control only on complaints, on targeted controls, it could be that you have another representation of bad EPC. What in Europe is that most countries realize a targeted control. Actually, the EPBD requires to do also at random check, and it's also the only way to have a view on your compliance rate, to do it at random if you really want to know it. So it's important for the member states to be aware of that and also to run random control. Now, regarding the last success factor, and Suzanne said that in the introduction, it needs courage and also resources. We had in 2012 a survey with the member states asking them what is, according to you, the most important barriers to implement an effective compliance framework. And we see the first one was the lack of political support, and then you find also the lack of resources to implement the system first and to make the system existing at the second. So it's also an issue to have enough resources to operate the system. So we have now the different success key, and if we make an overview, so you need an effective system of compliance checking. You need to monitor the compliance rate and to know it. You need clear legal framework and actor responsibilities. The sanctions have to be effective and adapted to the local context. You have to choose the appropriate moment to declare the performance and to check the compliance. You design and build an independent control system, and this needs courage and resources. As a conclusion to this presentation, we can say that enforcement has to integrate several elements. So this framework, including clear responsibilities, the internal control system covering quality control and compliance checking, and the effective sanctioning system. We see that some European member states have a long tradition with this issue. We also see that for other of them, this is a relatively new issue. We see, compared to a few years ago, that progresses have been made in Europe and are still ongoing and even necessary. Implementing and improve the national regulation is a continuous process, and we can say from our experience in Belgium that non-compliance is really not a fate. Okay, that was it. I thank you for your attention, and I am available if you have questions.